They say justice is blind, but in the Metropolitan Police Department, it had become something far worse. Corrupted, calculated, and cruel. For decades, a hidden network of officers had perfected the art of destroying lives with a badge, training rookies to see threats where none existed. They thought they had the perfect recruit in Officer Savannah Mitchell, young, ambitious, and willing to learn their playbook. Then one Thursday afternoon, she arrested Darnell Washington. She saw what she wanted to see, just another target, another statistic. What she couldn't see was that this single act would land her in front of Judge Marcus Carter, the same judge who had turned his own wrongful imprisonment into a masterclass in exposing police corruption. The man they called the Scale, because in his courtroom, justice wasn't just blind, it was inevitable. Now, as her carefully constructed world crumbles under the weight of video evidence, Officer Mitchell is about to learn why corrupt officers still whisper his name when cases land on his desk. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Officer Savannah Mitchell adjusted her freshly pressed uniform in the rearview mirror of her patrol car, admiring how the morning sun glinted off her newly pinned badge. The Metropolitan Police Department parking lot was already filling up for the morning shift, but she'd arrived early, not out of enthusiasm for learning from her seniors, but to show them she was already a step ahead. First day on patrol solo, she muttered to herself, practicing the confident smile she'd perfected through 4 months of field training. Time to show them what real police work looks like. As she strode through the precinct doors, several veteran officers nodded in greeting. Sergeant Thompson, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair and 23 years on the force, stepped away from the coffee machine to intercept her. "Mitchell," he called out, his tone carrying the weight of experience. "Got a minute before briefing?" Savannah's smile didn't waver, though internally she fought the urge to roll her eyes. "Of course, Sergeant," she replied, her voice honey-sweet but lined with steel. Thompson gestured to a quiet corner of the break room. "Look, I know you're eager to get out there, but remember what we discussed during training. This isn't River Creek anymore. The city's different, more complex. Take time to learn the neighborhoods, understand the community." "With all due respect, Sergeant," Savannah cut in, her smile tightening. "I graduated top of my class at the academy. I think I can handle whatever comes my way." The memory of her father's words echoed in her mind. A badge means authority, and authority means respect. Thompson's expression hardened slightly. "That's exactly the attitude I'm worried about. Mitchell, this job isn't about—" The briefing room door opened, and Lieutenant Chen's voice carried through the precinct. "Roll call in 5. "We'll finish this later," Thompson said. But Savannah was already walking away, her boots clicking purposefully against the linoleum floor. The briefing room filled quickly with the usual morning chaos. Officers trading, stories from the night shift, rookies comparing notes, and veterans claiming their usual seats. Savannah chose a spot in the front row, pulling out her notebook more for show than necessity. She'd already memorized all the standard protocols and procedures. Lieutenant Chen began the briefing with routine updates. A series of car break-ins in the South District, a warning about a new drug-making rounds in the clubs, and updates on ongoing investigations. Then she paused, her expression growing serious. "One more thing before assignments," Chen announced. "Judge Marcus Carter is presiding over several of our cases this month. Those of you who've been here a while know him. He's fair but extremely thorough. Expects everything by the book. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Make sure your paperwork is pristine." A few veteran officers nodded knowingly. Savannah jotted down the name, though privately she dismissed the warning. Paperwork was paperwork, and a judge was a judge. She'd dealt with plenty of authority figures in her life. As assignments were handed out, Savannah received her patrol route, a mixed residential and commercial area that some officers considered challenging due to its diverse population and complex community dynamics. To her, it was an opportunity to prove herself. The morning passed quickly as Savannah familiarized herself with her beat. She handled a shoplifting call with what she considered appropriate sternness, wrote 3 traffic tickets, and broke up a heated argument between neighbors, before it could escalate. Each interaction reinforced her belief in her own capabilities. It was early afternoon when the call came in. Possible disturbance at Marshall Street and 4th, the dispatcher's voice crackled through her radio. Male subject reportedly acting suspiciously near the convenience store. Copy that, Savannah responded immediately, already turning her patrol car toward the location. Unit 247 responding. The scene she found seemed deceptively ordinary. A young black man in business casual attire standing near the store entrance, checking his phone. Darnell Washington had no idea his life was about to intersect with Savannah's in a way that would change both their futures. Savannah approached with her hand resting casually on her utility belt, her stance broadcasting authority. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance." Darnell looked up from his phone, surprised. "Excuse me?" "We received reports of suspicious activity," Savannah stated, her voice carrying the clipped tones she'd practiced for commanding respect. "What's your business here?" "I'm waiting for my sister," Darnell replied, maintaining his composure despite his growing confusion. "She works at the dental office next door. We're meeting for lunch." Savannah's eyes narrowed. The answer was perfectly reasonable, but something in her bristled at his calm demeanor. In her mind, compliance meant nervous deference. "I'm going to need to see some ID. May I ask why?" Darnell's question was polite but direct. "I'm just standing here." "Sir, are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Savannah took a step closer, her hand tightening on her belt. "No, I'm simply asking, hands where I can see them." Savannah's voice rose sharply, drawing the attention of passers-by. Some pulled out their phones, sensing the situation deteriorating. What happened next would be debated in detail during the coming days. Savannah would claim Darnell made a sudden movement. Video evidence would later show him slowly reaching for his wallet, clearly stating his intentions. But in that moment, Savannah saw what she expected to see, what her preconceptions told her to see. Minutes later, Darnell Washington was in handcuffs, charged with resisting arrest, while bystanders recorded the incident on their phones. His sister emerged from the dental office to find him being placed in the back of a patrol car, her lunch break transformed into a nightmare. Back at the precinct, Savannah filed her report with confident flourishes, crafting a narrative that painted herself as a vigilant officer and Darnell as an uncooperative subject who had escalated a routine interaction. She barely noticed the concerned glances from her colleagues as she described the incident in the break room. "Had to show him how we handle things in the city," she boasted, missing the way Thompson and Chen exchanged worried looks. "Can't let them think they can just ignore an officer's commands." Meanwhile, across town, Darnell's mother, Patricia Washington, sat in the modest office of Marcus Williams, a local defense attorney known for handling civil rights cases. Her hands trembled as she described the phone call she'd received from her daughter. "My son has never been in trouble," Patricia insisted, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He's an accountant, Mr. Williams. He was just waiting for his sister to go to lunch." Marcus Williams listened intently, his expression growing more concerned as he reviewed the preliminary report and witness statements on his tablet. "The arresting officer is Savannah Mitchell," he noted. "New to the force, it seems." "Does that help us?" Patricia asked hopefully. "It might," Marcus replied carefully, "especially since this case has been assigned to Judge Carter's court." Across the city in his chambers, Judge Marcus Carter was already reviewing the day's cases when Darnell Washington's file came across his desk. The judge's dark eyes moved methodically over the report, his decades of experience allowing him to spot the subtle inconsistencies, the places where the narrative felt too neat, too practiced. He paused on Officer Mitchell's name, noting it was her first solo arrest. Something about the language in her report caught his attention. The way she emphasized her authority and Darnell's perceived defiance while glossing over the actual sequence of events. "Ms. Carson," he called to his clerk, "please pull Officer Mitchell's training records and any available footage from this incident. I think we need to look at this one carefully." The next morning, as Savannah strutted through the precinct sharing her version of events with anyone who would listen, she remained oblivious to the gathering storm. She dismissed a senior officer's attempted advice about proper escalation procedures and laughed off another's suggestion that she might want to review her body cam footage before the hearing. "Trust me," she said, leaning back in her chair during lunch break. "Once Judge Carter sees how I handled that situation, he'll understand. We can't let people think they can just question our authority whenever they feel like it." "Mitchell," Sergeant Thompson tried one last time. "Judge Carter isn't—" I know," she waved him off. "He's thorough, he's fair, he expects everything, by the book. But at the end of the day, he'll understand that I'm just doing my job, keeping the streets safe." As she spoke those words, Judge Carter was settling into his chambers, preparing for what would become one of the most significant cases of his career. On his desk lay two files, Darnell Washington's spotless record and Officer Savannah Mitchell's incident report. Between them sat a USB drive containing multiple angles of video footage that told a very different story than the one Savannah had written. The judge thought back to his own youth, to moments when authority had been wielded as a weapon rather than a responsibility. He pulled out his legal pad and began making notes, preparing for a hearing that would test not just one rookie officer's arrogance, but the very foundations of justice and accountability in his courtroom. The stage was set. In 48 hours, Officer Savannah Mitchell would stand in Judge Carter's courtroom, armed with nothing but her misplaced confidence and a fabricated narrative. She had no way of knowing that her first solo arrest would become a turning point, not just in her career, but in the ongoing national conversation about power, prejudice, and the true meaning of justice. As the sun set over the city, three people prepared for the coming storm in very different ways. Darnell Washington sat in his mother's living room, surrounded by family, trying to maintain his faith in a system that had already failed him once. Judge Carter worked late into the night, carefully reviewing precedents and procedures, knowing that what was coming would require all of his experience and wisdom. And Savannah Mitchell went home to her apartment, polishing her badge and rehearsing her testimony, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. The hearing was set for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, in Judge Marcus Carter's courtroom. Justice was about to wear a face that Officer Savannah Mitchell never expected to see. Monday morning arrived with a weight of expectation hanging in the air. The courthouse steps were already busy with the usual morning crowd when Officer Savannah Mitchell climbed them two at a time, her boots clicking against the worn marble. She'd spent extra time on her appearance, uniform pressed to military precision, badge polished to a mirror shine, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun without a single strand out of place. Several of her colleagues from the precinct were already gathered in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. Sergeant Thompson stood apart from the group, his expression grim as he watched Savannah approach. "Mitchell," he called out quietly. "A word?" Savannah checked her watch, still 20 minutes before the hearing. "Sure, Sarge, but make it quick. I want to review my notes one more time." Thompson led her to a quiet alcove. "Last chance to amend your report, if there's anything you want." "To clarify, seriously?" Savannah cut him off with a laugh that echoed too loudly in the marble hallway. "I appreciate the concern, but my report is perfect. Everything happened exactly as I wrote it." "Even with the video evidence?" "Videos don't show everything," Savannah replied, her tone dismissive. "Judge Carter will understand that we have to make split-second decisions in the field. Besides, I heard he's tough but fair." Thompson's weathered face tightened. "You're not listening." The heavy courtroom doors opened and a bailiff emerged. "All parties in Washington versus the city. Judge Carter's court is now in session." Savannah straightened her shoulders and flashed Thompson a confident smile. "Watch and learn, Sarge." Inside, the courtroom was filling quickly. Darnell Washington sat at the defense table with his attorney, Marcus Williams. His family occupied the first row behind him, his mother Patricia, sister Michelle, and several other relatives. They were dressed formally, their faces composed, but tense. Savannah strode to the prosecution's table where the city's attorney, James Morton, waited. He was reviewing a thick file, his forehead creased with concern. "Officer Mitchell," he murmured as she sat down. "I need to know if there's anything in these videos that might contradict your report. Anything at all." "Mr. Morton," Savannah replied, her voice carrying a hint of condescension. "I assure you, all rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmured conversations. "The Honorable Judge Marcus Carter presiding." Judge Carter entered with measured steps, his black robe flowing around him. He was tall, with close-cropped gray hair and dark skin that showed its age in distinguished lines around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes, sharp and observant, swept across the courtroom as he took his seat. "Be seated," he said, his voice deep and clear. "We're here today regarding the matter of Washington versus the city, concerning an arrest made by Officer Savannah Mitchell on Thursday afternoon. Mr. Williams, you may proceed with your motion." Marcus Williams stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Washington and request an immediate investigation into Officer Mitchell's conduct during this arrest. We have video evidence from multiple sources showing that my client was fully compliant, and that Officer Mitchell escalated the situation without cause." "Objection!" Savannah blurted out, half rising from her chair. Judge Carter's gaze fixed on her. "Officer Mitchell in my courtroom. Objections come from the attorneys, not the witnesses." "Mr. Morton?" The city attorney placed a restraining hand on Savannah's arm. "No objection, Your Honor. However, we maintain that the videos don't show the complete context of the interaction." "We'll examine that context thoroughly," Judge Carter replied. "Mr. Williams, present your evidence." Williams nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the lights. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and the first video began to play. It was from a bystander's phone, showing Darnell standing quietly by the store entrance, checking his phone. Savannah's approach was visible, her body language aggressive from the start. "As you can see, Your Honor," Williams narrated, "Mr. Washington was simply waiting for his sister, causing no disturbance, when Officer Mitchell approached him without probable cause." "That's not—" Savannah started to interrupt again. "Officer Mitchell," Judge Carter's voice carried a note of warning, "interrupt these proceedings one more time without being addressed, and I will hold you in contempt. Is that clear?" Savannah's face flushed. "Yes, Your Honor," she managed, though her jaw remained tight. The video continued, showing the escalation exactly as it had happened. Darnell's calm questions, Savannah's increasingly aggressive responses, the moment when she claimed. He made a threatening movement. "Now," Williams said, "let's compare this to Officer Mitchell's body cam footage." The second video started, and Savannah felt her confidence waver for the first time. The angle was different, but the story it told was the same. Worse, her own. Voice sounded different than she remembered. Harder, more confrontational. "Note the timestamp, Your Honor," Williams continued. "Officer Mitchell claims in her report that Mr. Washington exhibited suspicious behavior for several minutes before she approached. The video shows she initiated contact within seconds of arriving." Morton shifted uncomfortably beside Savannah. "Your Honor, while the timing may be slightly off, we maintain that Officer Mitchell had reasonable suspicion based on the call she received." "About that call," Williams interjected. "We've subpoenaed the dispatch records. The complaint came from a payphone, and when investigators tried to follow up, they found no one in the area who had actually witnessed any suspicious behavior. We believe Officer Mitchell either fabricated the call or responded to a deliberately false report without proper verification." Savannah's face grew hot. She hadn't expected them to trace the call. The truth was, she'd seen Darnell from her patrol car and decided he looked out of place. The dispatch call in her report was an afterthought, a detail added to justify her actions. Judge Carter leaned forward. "Mr. Morton, does the city wish to respond to this allegation?" Morton tugged at his collar. "We need time to verify the dispatch records, Your Honor." "Very well." Judge Carter made a note on his pad. "Mr. Williams, continue." The morning proceeded like a slow-motion nightmare for Savannah. Williams methodically dismantled her report, pointing out discrepancies between her written statement and the video evidence. More witnesses came forward. The store owner who testified that Darnell was a regular customer, Michelle Washington's supervisor confirming their lunch plans, even a passing jogger who'd recorded part of the interaction on her phone. During a brief recess, Morton pulled Savannah aside. "This is bad," he whispered. "You told me you had probable cause. You told me the videos would support your story." "They're just twisting things," Savannah insisted, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "That's what defense attorneys do, right?" Morton stared at her for a long moment. "Officer Mitchell, I'm going to recommend the city settle this case, and if I were you, I'd start thinking very carefully about what you're going to say when Judge Carter calls you to testify." "I'm not lying," Savannah snapped, but the words tasted bitter in her mouth. When court resumed, Judge Carter called Darnell to the stand. Savannah watched as he testified, her perception of him shifting uncomfortably. In her report, she'd painted him as aggressive, non-compliant. But the man on the stand was articulate and composed, his account of events matching perfectly with the video evidence. "Mr. Washington," Williams asked, "had you had any previous interactions with law enforcement?" "No, sir," Darnell replied. "I've never been arrested or even received a traffic ticket. I'm an accountant. I was just waiting for my sister like I do every Thursday." "And how has this incident affected you?" Darnell's composure cracked slightly. I used to believe that if you did everything right, followed the rules, respected authority, you'd be okay. Now, I'm nervous every time I see a patrol car. I had to explain to my nieces why their uncle was in handcuffs. How do you explain something like that to children?" From her seat, Savannah heard Patricia Washington stifle a sob. For the first time since the arrest, doubt crept into her mind. She glanced at Judge Carter and found him watching her, his expression unreadable. "Officer Mitchell," Judge Carter's voice cut through her thoughts. "Please take the stand." As Savannah walked to the witness box, she tried to recapture her earlier confidence. She'd practiced her testimony, prepared her answers. But under the harsh fluorescent lights, with Judge Carter's penetrating gaze fixed on her, those practiced words felt hollow. "Officer Mitchell," Williams began his cross-examination. "Please explain why you felt Mr. Washington's behavior was suspicious enough to warrant investigation." Savannah swallowed hard. "The call stated." "The call we've established came from an empty payphone," Williams interrupted. "Let's focus on what you actually observed." "He was standing near the store entrance," Savannah said, her voice smaller than usual. "It's a high-crime area." "Objection," Williams cut in. "The crime statistics for that neighborhood show it's one of the safest in the city. Would you like me to enter those statistics into evidence?" "Sustained," Judge Carter said. "Officer Mitchell, please stick to your direct observations." The questioning continued, each of Savannah's answers sounding weaker than the last. Williams methodically exposed every inconsistency, every assumption, every moment where her prejudices had colored her actions. "One final question," Williams said. "In your report, you claimed Mr. Washington made a sudden threatening movement. Yet, in none of the videos, not the bystander footage, not your body cam, not the store security camera, does any such movement appear. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Savannah felt sweat beading on her forehead. The courtroom was silent, waiting for her answer. She looked at Darnell, at his family, at Judge Carter. The weight of truth pressed down on her. I thought he was going to..." She trailed off, unable to finish the lie. "You thought?" Judge Carter's voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the courtroom. "Officer Mitchell, in your report you stated with certainty. There was no thought or believed. You wrote it as fact. Are you now saying you were mistaken?" Savannah's voice cracked. "I may have misinterpreted." "May have?" "Judge," Carter's tone sharpened. "Officer Mitchell, you are under oath. Did Mr. Washington make a threatening movement or did you lie in your report?" The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, barely audible, Savannah whispered, No, sir. He didn't move like that. I'm sorry, Judge Carter said. I don't believe everyone heard you. Please speak up. Savannah's face burned with shame. No, Your Honor. Mr. Washington did not make a threatening movement. I wrote what I thought would justify the arrest. The admission hung in the air like smoke. From the gallery, Savannah heard someone gasp. She couldn't bear to look at Thompson or her other colleagues. Judge Carter's voice cut through the silence. Given this admission, we'll adjourn for today. Mr. Morton, I expect the city's motion to dismiss all charges against Mr. Washington on my desk within the hour. Additionally, I'm ordering a full investigation into Officer Mitchell's conduct, both in this incident and any previous arrests she's made. He turned his full attention to Savannah, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Officer Mitchell, remain in my chambers. We need to discuss the consequences of perjuring yourself in my courtroom. As the gallery began to clear, Savannah remained rooted to the witness stand. Her carefully constructed world of authority and control had crumbled, leaving her to face the truth about herself and her actions. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Judge Carter's final words before he retired to his chambers. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9. Officer Mitchell, I suggest you spend the intervening time reflecting on the true meaning of the oath you took to protect and serve. This isn't River Creek anymore, and I'm not a judge who will turn a blind eye to abuse of power, regardless of who wields that power or what badge they wear. The morning after Savannah's devastating testimony, the courthouse hallways buzzed with whispered conversations. Legal aides hurried past with stacks of files, and reporters clustered near the building's entrance, hoping to catch anyone involved in what they'd started calling the Mitchell case. Inside Judge Carter's chambers, the morning sun slanted through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across his desk. He sat reviewing the latest evidence submissions, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. A gentle knock at the door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called, not looking up from the documents. His clerk, Sarah Chen, entered with a fresh stack of papers. "Sir, the investigation team sent over Officer Mitchell's complete record from River Creek Police Department." Judge Carter accepted the file, noting its suspicious thinness. "This is everything?" "That's what's strange, Your Honor," Sarah replied. "According to the cover letter, several files were marked as misplaced during a recent system upgrade." "Convenient timing," Judge Carter murmured, making a note in his legal pad. "What about the body cam footage from her training period?" "Technical difficulties, apparently. Most of it's corrupted." Judge Carter removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Get me Judge Henderson from River Creek on the phone. I want to know if these technical issues affected any other officers' records." Meanwhile, in a small conference room down the hall, Marcus Williams sat with Darnell and his family, preparing for the day's testimony. The defense attorney spread several photographs across the table, snapshots from security cameras showing Darnell's regular Thursday visits to see his sister. "These establish your pattern," Williams explained. "Every Thursday for the past year, same time, same place. Officer Mitchell couldn't have had any legitimate reason to consider your presence suspicious." Darnell nodded, but his attention was on another document, Mitchell's incident report. "She wrote that I was lurking suspiciously and behaving erratically," he read aloud, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Who was she seeing when she looked at me? Because it wasn't me." Patricia reached for her son's hand. "Baby, some people see what they want to see." "That's exactly what we're going to prove today," Williams said, pulling out another file. "We've got testimony from 6 other people Officer Mitchell arrested during her training period. All of them tell similar stories." Across town at the Metropolitan Police Department, Sergeant Thompson sat in Lieutenant Chen's office, both of them reviewing Mitchell's training evaluations. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of missed warning signs. "Here," Thompson said, pointing to a note he'd made 3 weeks into Mitchell's training. "Showed concerning bias in subject interactions. Recommended additional diversity training." Chen frowned. "What was the response?" "Got overruled. Her test scores were too good, and we were short-staffed. Thompson's face showed the burden of that compromise. We should have pushed harder. Don't start that, Chen warned. We're not here to shoulder Mitchell's guilt. We just need to make sure we catch everything now. Back in the courtroom, people filed in slowly, the morning's tension palpable. Savannah sat at the prosecution table, her uniform still pristine, but her posture markedly different from the previous day. Gone was the swagger, replaced by a rigid stillness that spoke of sleepless nights and uncomfortable revelations. Judge Carter entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. Be seated, the judge said, his voice carrying its usual measured authority. Mr. Williams, you may call your next witness. The defense calls Officer Peter Rodriguez. Savannah's head snapped up as her former training partner walked to the witness stand. Rodriguez avoided her gaze as he was sworn in. Officer Rodriguez, Williams began. You worked with Officer Mitchell during her field training, correct? Yes, sir, for approximately 6 weeks. During that time, did you observe any concerning behavior in her interactions with civilians? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. I noted several instances where Officer Mitchell seemed to approach situations with preconceived notions. Could you be more specific? There was one case. Rodriguez glanced at Savannah before continuing. We responded to a noise complaint in the Garden District. Before we even got out of the car, Mitchell had decided it was probably gang-related because of the neighborhood demographics. Turned out to be a kid's birthday party. Williams nodded. Did you report these concerns? I included them in my training evaluations? Yes. And what happened? The evaluations were modified before final submission. I was told we needed to focus on her technical proficiency, not subjective concerns. The questioning continued, painting a picture of systematic oversight and ignored warning signs. Rodriguez's testimony was followed by 2 other training officers, each adding pieces to the puzzle of how Savannah's biases had been allowed to flourish unchecked. During a brief recess, City Attorney Morton approached the defense table. Mr. Williams, a word? They stepped into a quiet corner, where Morton spoke in low tones. The city is prepared to offer a settlement. Full dismissal of charges, written apology, compensation for Mr. Washington, and immediate termination of Officer Mitchell's employment. Williams' expression remained neutral. And the broader investigation Judge Carter ordered? That's complicated. The department is willing to implement additional training. No deal. Williams cut him off. This isn't just about Darnell anymore. You heard the testimony. How many other lives has she affected? How many reports has she falsified? The system that enabled her needs to be exposed. When court resumed, the prosecution called their expert witness, Dr. Angela Martinez, a specialist in law enforcement training and behavioral psychology. She'd reviewed all available evidence, including Savannah's background and training records. In Tsansien, my professional opinion, Dr. Martinez testified, Officer Mitchell's behavior shows a clear pattern of confirmation bias and authority complex, likely stemming from her background and reinforced by inadequate oversight during training. Could you elaborate? Morton asked, trying to salvage something from the testimony. Officer Mitchell appears to have entered law enforcement with a rigid worldview about authority and compliance. Rather than having these assumptions challenged and corrected during training, they were effectively reinforced by a system that prioritized technical proficiency over emotional intelligence and community engagement. Judge Carter leaned forward. Dr. Martinez, in your review of Officer Mitchell's records, did you find any evidence that these issues were identified and addressed during her training? Yes, Your Honor, but only at the initial observation level. Several training officers noted concerns, but these notes were consistently minimized or dismissed in final evaluations. The afternoon brought more damaging testimony. A parking attendant from near the convenience store testified about regularly seeing Darnell waiting for his sister. The store owner provided months of security footage showing the same Thursday pattern. Each witness added another crack to Savannah's already crumbling narrative. Finally, Williams called his last witness of the day, Michelle Washington, Darnell's sister. Ms. Washington, Williams began, please tell us about your Thursday lunches with your brother. Michelle's voice was steady but emotional. "We started having lunch together after our father passed away last year. Dad always said family needs to stay connected, so every Thursday, Darnell would wait for me outside my work, and we'd go to lunch. Sometimes we'd just talk about our week, sometimes about Dad. It was our way of keeping his memory alive. And on the day of the incident, I was running a few minutes late because of a patient emergency. I tried to text Darnell, but by the time I got outside," Michelle paused, composing herself. "By the time I got outside, he was already in handcuffs. I tried to explain to Officer Mitchell that he was my brother, that we did this every week, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept saying he was resisting arrest, but he wasn't. He wasn't doing anything wrong." The courtroom was silent as Michelle described watching her brother being placed in the patrol car, the helplessness she felt, the frantic call to their mother. Savannah stared at her hands, unable to look up as Michelle's testimony continued. "Did this incident affect your Thursday lunches?" Williams asked. We haven't been able to do them since," Michelle admitted, tears finally spilling over. "Darnell won't come to that area anymore. We tried once last week, but he had a panic attack just parking his car. Officer Mitchell didn't just arrest my brother that day. She took something precious from our family." As Michelle stepped down from the witness stand, Judge Carter called for the day's final witness, Detective Sarah Martinez from Internal Affairs. "Detective," Judge Carter addressed her directly, "what has your investigation revealed about Officer Mitchell's prior arrests?" "Your Honor, we've identified 13 arrests during her training period that show patterns similar to Mr. Washington's case. In each instance, the initial cause for contact was questionable, and the situation escalated primarily due to Officer Mitchell's approach and attitude." "And the body cam footage from these incidents?" "Most of it is unavailable, sir, either not properly uploaded or corrupted in the system. However, we've located civilian recordings of 3 incidents that directly contradict Officer Mitchell's written reports." Judge Carter's expression darkened. "And who was responsible for maintaining these records?" "That's where it gets complicated, Your Honor. The chain of custody shows multiple handlers, unclear protocols, and a pattern of technical glitches that seem to affect certain officers' footage more than others. The implications of systemic issues hung heavy in the air." Judge Carter made several notes before addressing the courtroom. "We'll adjourn for today. Tomorrow morning, I want to hear from the department's records supervisor and IT manager. Detective Martinez, please ensure they have full documentation ready regarding these technical issues and chain of custody protocols." As people began filing out, Savannah remained seated, the weight of the day's revelations visible in her posture. Her confident facade had crumbled entirely, replaced by a growing understanding of the damage she'd caused. Judge Carter watched her for a moment before speaking. "Officer Mitchell," she looked up, startled. "I expect you back here tomorrow morning. There are still questions you need to answer." "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered. In the gathering dusk outside the courthouse, 3 conversations took place simultaneously. In his chambers, Judge Carter spoke quietly with his clerk about subpoenaing records from River Creek. In the parking lot, Darnell hugged his sister, both of them finally allowing themselves to hope for justice. And in a dimly lit stairwell, Sergeant Thompson found Savannah sitting alone, her head in her hands. "Mitchell," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes red. I never meant." "I know," Thompson replied, sitting beside her. "But meaning to hurt people and hurting them anyway. Sometimes that's worse. Because it means you didn't even think enough about them to consider how your actions would affect their lives." The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. In the growing darkness, Officer Savannah Mitchell began to understand that the real measure of authority wasn't in how much power you could wield, but in how carefully you wielded it. Dawn broke over the city courthouse, painting the stone facade in shades of amber. Inside his chambers, Judge Marcus Carter sat reviewing a stack of newly acquired documents, his morning coffee growing cold beside him. Each page seemed to add another layer to what had started as a simple case of police misconduct. Knock at his door preceded Sarah Chen's entrance. "Your Honor, the files you requested from River Creek arrived overnight." Carter accepted the thick manila envelope, noting the expedited delivery stamp. Judge Henderson came through. Yes, sir. She also included a personal note. Sarah handed over a sealed letter. Carter read it quickly, his expression darkening. She says there's been pressure to restrict access to certain records. Interesting timing. He placed the letter in his desk drawer. What about the IT manager's report? Mr. Phillips is waiting outside with Detective Martinez. They've found something you need to see. The judge nodded. Send them in. James Phillips, the department's IT manager, entered alongside Detective Martinez. Phillips was a nervous man in his 50s, clutching a laptop to his chest like a shield. Detective Martinez's calm presence seemed to steady him as they took their seats. Mr. Phillips, Carter began. I understand you've discovered some irregularities in the department's digital records. Phillips glanced at Martinez before speaking. Yes, Your Honor. After your order to investigate the missing footage, I did a deep dive into our storage systems. The corrupted files weren't random glitches. Explain. Phillips opened his laptop, turning it to show a complex series of logs. Someone accessed these files using administrative credentials. The corruption wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate. They used a program designed to corrupt specific video segments while leaving the metadata intact. Can you determine who accessed the files? That's where it gets complicated. Phillips scrolled through the logs. The credentials belong to Captain Robert Drake, but the access patterns don't match his normal usage. Someone else was using his login. Carter's eyes narrowed. And where is Captain Drake now? On administrative leave, Martinez answered. Has been for 3 months, officially for stress-related health issues. Convenient, Carter murmured. Mr. Phillips, how far back do these corrupted files go? At least 18 months, Your Honor. And it's not just Officer Mitchell's footage. We've identified similar patterns with several other officers, all of whom had multiple civilian complaints filed against them. The implications hung heavy in the air. Carter made several notes before looking up. Detective Martinez, I want a full list of every officer whose footage was affected. Mr. Phillips, prepare a detailed report on the technical aspects of this tampering. We'll need both for today's hearing. As they left, Sarah Chen returned with another update. Sir, there's a reporter from the City Times asking for comment. The story about evidence tampering has leaked. Carter sighed. Tell them no comment until after today's proceedings. And Sarah, make sure we have extra security in the courtroom. Across town, in a modest diner far from the courthouse, Sergeant Thompson sat across from Lieutenant Chen, both nursing cups of coffee that had long gone cold. How deep do you think this goes? Chen asked quietly. Thompson glanced around the nearly empty diner. Remember last year when Internal Affairs tried to implement that new body camera review protocol? Chen nodded. It got shut down. Budget concerns, they said. Budget had nothing to do with it. They were afraid of what they'd find. Thompson pulled out his phone, showing Chen a series of emails. I've been keeping records, Lisa. Every time I reported concerns about an officer, every complaint that got buried, every technical issue with the footage. Why didn't you come forward sooner? And report it to whom? The same people who were burying the evidence? Thompson's voice carried years of frustration. But now, with Judge Carter involved, Chen studied her old friend's face. You're going to testify. Someone has to. Mitchell isn't the disease. She's a symptom. Back at the courthouse, the morning session began with an unusual tension in the air. The gallery was packed, with several journalists among the spectators. Savannah sat at the prosecution table, looking smaller than ever in her uniform. Judge, Carter entered, his expression grave. Before we proceed, I want to address some new developments in this case. Mr. Williams, Mr. Morton, approach the bench. As the attorneys came forward, Carter spoke in low tones. Gentlemen, given the evidence of systematic tampering with police records, I'm expanding the scope of this hearing. Mr. Morton, I understand this puts the city in a difficult position. Morton tugged at his collar. Your Honor, my instructions, from the City Council, need to be reassessed in light of this new evidence. Carter cut him off. I'm giving you 1 hour to consult with your superiors. This is no longer just about Officer Mitchell. When the attorneys returned to their tables, Carter addressed the courtroom. Detective Martinez, please take the stand. Martinez was sworn in, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the nervous energy filling the room. Detective, Carter began, please share your findings regarding the department's handling of digital evidence. Martinez outlined the technical details Phillips had discovered, explaining how the selective corruption of footage had created blind spots in oversight. As she spoke, Savannah seemed to shrink further into herself, realizing she'd been a small piece in a much larger puzzle. And what about Officer Mitchell's cases specifically? Carter asked. We've reviewed all 13 cases previously identified, Martinez replied. In each instance where footage was corrupted, we found civilian recordings that contradicted the official reports. Additionally, we've discovered 27 more cases with similar patterns during her training period. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Savannah's head snapped up, shock evident on her face. She hadn't known about many of these cases, incidents her training officers had handled while she watched, learning their methods. Your Honor, Williams stood. Given this new evidence, the defense moves to add several witnesses to our list. Individuals from these newly discovered cases. Granted, Carter replied. Mr. Morton? The city attorney looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, the city requests a brief recess to... Denied, Carter cut him off. Detective Martinez, please continue. As Martinez detailed the pattern of misconduct, a larger picture emerged. It wasn't just about one rookie officer's prejudices. It was about a system that had cultivated and protected those prejudices. During the lunch recess, Savannah found herself alone in a courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The door opened, and she looked up to see Michelle Washington's reflection in the mirror. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Michelle broke the silence. Did you know? Savannah turned, water dripping from her chin. Know what? About the others, the other people whose lives you and your colleagues ruined. Did you know? Savannah's voice was barely a whisper. No. I mean, I knew some things weren't right, but I thought... She trailed off, realizing how hollow any explanation would sound. Michelle's voice was steady but filled with controlled emotion. You know what the worst part is? Every Thursday, I look out my office window at lunchtime. Every single Thursday. And every time, I expect to see my brother standing there, checking his phone, waiting to hear about my day. But he's not there. And he might never be there again. She turned to leave, then paused. Officer Mitchell? Whatever happens in that courtroom, I hope you remember that moment, when you decided my brother didn't deserve to be treated like a human being, because we'll never forget it. When court resumed, Sergeant Thompson took the stand. His testimony laid bare years of ignored warnings and buried complaints. It wasn't just Officer Mitchell, he explained. The department had an unofficial policy. Certain officers were protected. Their body cam footage would conveniently malfunction. Civilian complaints would get lost in the system, and anyone who raised concerns was quietly pressured to back off. And why are you coming forward now? Williams asked. Thompson's eyes found Savannah's. Because sometimes you have to decide what kind of cop you want to be, one who upholds the law or one who hides behind it. As the afternoon wore on, more witnesses came forward. A parade of civilians shared stories eerily similar to Darnell's. Routine encounters that escalated because of officer prejudice, reports that misrepresented events, complaints that disappeared into the bureaucratic void. Judge Carter listened to each testimony, occasionally glancing at Savannah, watching as the weight of revelation settled on her shoulders. She'd entered his courtroom believing she was defending her authority. Now she was witnessing the collapse of everything she'd been taught to believe about that authority. Late in the afternoon, an unexpected witness appeared. Captain Robert Drake himself, accompanied by his attorney. Captain Drake, Carter addressed him. I understand you've reached an agreement with the district attorney's office. Yes, Your Honor. Drake's voice was tired but resolute. In exchange for immunity, I'm prepared to testify about the department's handling of misconduct complaints and digital evidence. What followed was a devastating account of systematic corruption. Drake detailed how certain officers were selected for protection, how evidence was manipulated, and how whistleblowers were silenced. Officer Mitchell, he said at one point, was exactly the kind of rookie we looked for. Ambitious, authority-oriented, and willing to follow the unwritten rules. We paired her with training officers who would reinforce those tendencies. And the missing records from River Creek? Carter prompted. We had contacts there. When we learned about this hearing, we reached out, asked them to minimize certain aspects of her record. As Drake's testimony continued, Savannah felt the last pieces of her worldview crumbling. Every certainty she'd held about her role, her authority, her place in the system, all of it was built on a foundation of corruption and prejudice. Judge Carter called for a brief recess before the day's final witness. In the hallway, Darnell Washington stood with his family, listening to their attorney explain the broadening implications of the case. This isn't just about your arrest anymore, Williams told them. Judge Carter's going to use this case to force a complete overhaul of the department's oversight systems. And Officer Mitchell? Patricia Washington asked. Williams glanced toward where Savannah sat alone on a bench, staring at nothing. She's a small piece of a bigger problem, but sometimes it takes a small piece to bring down the whole structure. When court resumed, Judge Carter addressed the packed gallery. Given today's revelations, this hearing will be expanded into a full investigation of departmental practices. Mr. Morton, I understand the City Council has requested time to prepare a formal response. Yes, Your Honor. They're prepared to announce a complete review of all affected cases and implement new oversight procedures. That's not enough, Carter replied firmly. I'm appointing a special master to oversee this investigation. Every case involving corrupted evidence will be reviewed. Every officer named in Captain Drake's testimony will be investigated, and every victim of this systemic abuse will have their day in court. He turned to where Savannah sat, looking lost, in her now wrinkled uniform. Officer Mitchell, while you are not solely responsible for this institutional failure, you are not absolved of your actions. I'm ordering your immediate suspension pending a full review of your conduct. Additionally, you will participate in the investigation, sharing everything you know about these practices. Savannah nodded numbly, understanding that her career in law enforcement was effectively over. As for Mr. Washington's case, Carter continued, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Williams, you may file your civil suit at your convenience. The evidence presented here will be preserved for those proceedings. As the judge prepared to adjourn, Savannah suddenly stood. Your Honor, may I say something? Carter studied her for a moment before nodding, briefly. Savannah turned to face the Washington family. Her voice trembled but grew stronger as she spoke. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to Mr. Washington, but for everything I represented. I thought authority meant never having to question. Yourself. I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that mistake. Judge Carter let her words hang in the air before making his final statement. This court is adjourned until Monday morning, when we'll begin examining the full scope of this misconduct. I remind everyone present that this investigation is ongoing, and all evidence is to be preserved. As people filed out of the courtroom, Savannah remained standing, watching as Darnell and his family left together, Michelle's words echoing in her mind. Every Thursday, she thought, understanding finally the true weight of what she'd done, not just to one family, but to countless others whose stories were only now coming to light. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Judge Carter watched from his chamber window as reporters gathered, knowing that tomorrow's headlines would tell only part of the story. The real work, the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust and accountability, was just beginning. Rain drummed against the windows of the precinct's records room as Savannah hunched over a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The clock on the wall showed 2:17 a.m., but she barely noticed. She'd been here for hours, diving deep into public records, news archives, and any database she could access. Her target, Judge Marcus Carter. Her desperation had driven her here after 3 sleepless nights. The investigation was destroying everything she'd built, everything she believed in. But if she could find something, anything, to discredit the judge. A news article from 35 years ago caught her attention. The headline made her pause. Local teen cleared after 3 months in detention. The grainy photograph showed a much younger Marcus Carter being embraced by his parents outside a courthouse. Savannah leaned closer, reading intently. According to the article, 17-year-old Marcus Carter had been wrongfully arrested for a convenience store robbery. Despite multiple witnesses placing him at a school event during the crime, he'd spent 3 months in juvenile detention before being cleared. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kevin Nash, a journalist she'd contacted earlier. Got your message. Meet me at Riverside Diner in 20? Savannah glanced at the time, then back at the article. On my way, she typed back. The diner was nearly empty when she arrived, the fluorescent lights harsh against the rain-streaked windows. Nash sat in a corner booth, laptop open, coffee cooling beside him. He was younger than she expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, hungry for his first big story. Officer Mitchell, he greeted her, eyes bright with anticipation. You said you had something on Judge Carter. Savannah slid into the booth, pushing a thumb drive across the table. His juvenile record was sealed, but I found newspaper coverage. Did you know he was arrested as a teenager? Nash's fingers hovered over his laptop keys. That's public record. What makes it newsworthy? Think about it, Savannah pressed. A judge who was wrongfully arrested as a teen, now presiding over cases involving police misconduct. How can he be impartial? You think he's biased against law enforcement because of his past? I think the public deserves to know about potential conflicts of interest. The words felt rehearsed, hollow. Nash was already skimming through the files. This is interesting, but it's thin. We'd need more to make it a story. What if I told you there were rumors about his time in juvenile detention? Things that didn't make it into the official record? Like what? Savannah hesitated. The next words would cross a line, and she knew it. I heard he might have been involved in some violence while he was inside. Nothing proven, but... Nash's expression shifted subtly. That's a serious allegation. Any evidence? Not yet. But if you start digging... You're asking me to imply a sitting judge has a violent past based on unsubstantiated rumors? Nash closed his laptop. Officer Mitchell, I may be new, but I'm not stupid. This feels like a hit piece. The public has a right to the truth, Nash cut her off, not to manufactured scandals. He stood, gathering his things. For what it's worth, I hope you find a better way through this. Savannah watched him leave, the rejection stinging more than she expected. But she wasn't done. She had other contacts, other journalists who might be more willing to run with the story. By morning, she'd made 3 more calls. Each one ended similarly to her meeting with Nash. But her last contact, a blogger known for controversial takes on local politics, showed interest. Send me what you have, he said. No promises, but I might be able to work with this. Savannah emailed him the files from the precinct computer, adding her own anonymous source quotes about concerns over the judge's objectivity. Her hands shook as she hit send, knowing she was committing career suicide if she was caught. But she felt trapped, desperate for any way to undermine the investigation's credibility. She didn't expect things to move so quickly. By noon, the blog post was live. Exclusive. Judge Carter's hidden past. Can we trust his judgment? The piece was sensational, implying dark undertones to Carter's juvenile detention stay and questioning whether his past had created a vendetta against law enforcement. The story spread through social media like wildfire, picking up embellishments. With each sharing, local news stations began calling the courthouse for comment. Protesters from police support groups gathered outside, demanding Carter recuse himself from the investigation. Judge Carter was in his chambers when Sarah Chen brought him the printouts of the growing scandal. He read them silently, his expression unreadable. Should we issue a statement? Sarah asked. No need, Carter replied calmly. Have the bailiff inform everyone that court will begin 30 minutes early tomorrow, and Sarah, make sure Officer Mitchell is notified. The next morning, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists filled the back rows, cameras ready. Savannah sat rigidly at the prosecution table, trying to ignore the knowing looks from her colleagues. Everyone seemed to suspect where the leaked information had originated. Judge Carter entered precisely at 8:30 a.m. The usual all-rise call felt charged with extra tension. Be seated, Carter said, his voice carrying its usual measured authority. Before we continue with our investigation, I'd like to address the recent media attention regarding my personal history. A rustle of anticipation went through the gallery. Savannah held her breath. 35 years ago, I was wrongfully arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I spent 3 months in juvenile detention before being exonerated. These facts are public record, though someone has recently tried to embellish them with unsupported allegations. He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. What isn't public record is what I learned during those 3 months. I learned how it feels to be powerless in a system that presumes guilt. I learned that authority without accountability is nothing but institutionalized bullying. And I learned that justice delayed is often justice denied. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Those lessons shaped my career choices. They're why I became a public defender before joining the bench. They're why I'm known for being thorough in examining evidence. And they're why I will not recuse myself from this investigation. His eyes found Savannah's. Someone hoped that by exposing my past, they would discredit this investigation. They failed to understand that my experience doesn't make me biased against law enforcement. It makes me uniquely qualified to recognize the difference between proper police work and abuse of power. Savannah felt herself shrinking under his gaze, understanding too late the magnitude of her mistake. Now, Carter continued, let's discuss how these sealed juvenile records were accessed and who provided them to certain media outlets. The IT manager, Phillips, was called to testify first. He detailed the unauthorized database searches made from the precinct's records room computer at 2:17 a.m. using Savannah's login credentials. Next came Kevin Nash, the young journalist, who testified about his meeting with Savannah at the diner. His testimony was followed by emails from other journalists she'd contacted, each one documenting her attempts to plant the story. Finally, the blogger who'd published the piece was called in. Under oath, he admitted to embellishing the story based on Savannah's suggestions, adding unsubstantiated claims about violence that she had hinted at, but never directly stated. As the evidence mounted, Savannah felt the last remnants of her professional reputation crumbling. She'd crossed a line, violated ethical boundaries, and for what? To discredit a judge whose only crime was seeking truth and accountability. During a brief recess, she found herself face-to-face with Judge Carter in a quiet corridor. For a long moment, neither spoke. Why? He finally asked, his voice carrying more sadness than anger. I thought if people questioned your objectivity. You thought wrong, Carter cut her off. Do you know what I remember most from my time in detention? Not the fear, not the isolation. I remember Officer James Wilson. Who? The guard. Who noticed I was reading law books in the library. Instead of mocking me like the others, he brought me more books. Said if I was going to study law, I should understand all sides of it. He taught me that wearing a badge doesn't make someone good or bad. It's how they use the authority that comes with it. Savannah felt tears threatening. I just wanted to protect my career. No, Carter replied quietly. You wanted to protect your illusions about what that career meant. There's a difference. When court resumed, Carter addressed the attempt to discredit him directly. This court will not be swayed by attempts at character assassination. However, Officer Mitchell's actions in accessing sealed records and attempting to plant false stories show a disturbing pattern of ethical violations. This will be added to the ongoing investigation of her conduct. The rest of the day brought more revelations about departmental corruption, but Savannah barely heard them. She was lost in thought, remembering her own journey from idealistic academy graduate to someone who would try to destroy a man's reputation to to protect a broken system. Late that afternoon, as the session was wrapping up, an elderly man entered the courtroom. Judge Carter's face showed rare surprise. "Officer Wilson," he said softly. James Wilson, now well into his 70s, smiled from the gallery. "Been following the case in the papers, Your Honor. Thought you might need a friendly face today." Carter's composure cracked slightly. "The court will recess for 15 minutes. In his chambers, Carter and Wilson shared a brief but emotional reunion. Savannah, watching through the doorway, finally understood what real authority looked like. It wasn't about power or control. It was about impact, about the ripples one person's actions could create across decades. When proceedings resumed, Wilson stayed in the gallery, a living reminder of how single acts of kindness or cruelty could shape lives forever. Judge Carter ended the day with a statement that would be quoted in news articles for weeks to come. 35. Years ago, I was a teenager in detention, convinced the system was irredeemably corrupt. One person showed me that within any system, no matter how flawed, there are people working for positive change. Today, we're not just investigating misconduct, we're creating an opportunity for positive change. How we use that opportunity will define us far more than any mistakes in our past. The words hit Savannah like a physical blow. She thought about Darnell Washington, about all the others whose lives she'd impacted. She'd tried to destroy a good man's reputation to protect her own, only to discover that his past made him not weaker, but stronger, more qualified to judge her actions and their consequences. As people filed out of the courtroom, Wilson stopped beside her. "You know," he said quietly, 35 years ago, I saw another young person letting fear and pride drive them to make bad choices. Want to know what I told him?" Savannah looked up, surprised. "What?" "That it's never too late to choose a different path. That one mistake, or even many mistakes, don't have to define your whole story." He glanced toward Carter's chambers. "He proved me right. Maybe you will too." The rain had stopped by the time Savannah left the courthouse. The setting sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the steps. She paused, looking back at the building where her attempts at deception had turned into a lesson about truth, justice, and the long arc of consequence. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus Williams, scheduling her deposition for the civil suit. Another step in the long process of accountability that lay ahead. But for the first time since the investigation began, she felt something besides fear and desperation. She felt hope. Not for escaping consequences, but for the possibility of redemption through truth. The pounding on Savannah Mitchell's door came at 6:15 a.m. She was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee, when she heard the authoritative voice, "FBI, open the door." Her hands trembled as she complied. 4 agents in dark jackets entered, their badges gleaming in the early morning light. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, presented the warrant. "Officer Savannah Mitchell, you're under arrest for tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law." As they led her out in handcuffs, Savannah noticed her neighbors watching from behind curtained windows. Her cruiser sat in the driveway. She wouldn't be driving it again. Across town, similar scenes played out at other addresses. Captain Drake, despite his immunity deal, was taken into custody for additional charges uncovered during the investigation. 3 training officers were arrested. Even the IT manager, Phillips, was brought in after evidence suggested he'd been more involved in the cover-up than he'd admitted. In his chambers, Judge Carter reviewed the federal arrest warrants. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, no relation to his clerk, sat across from him, explaining the scope of the federal investigation. "The evidence tampering wasn't isolated to your jurisdiction," she explained. "We've found similar patterns in departments across 3 states. Your case broke it open." Carter studied the files. "The River Creek connection?" "Exactly, officer. Mitchell's former department was the key. Once we started pulling those threads..." Chen spread out a diagram showing links between multiple police departments. It's a network. They share techniques, technology, even personnel. How long has this been under investigation? 8 months. We were building our case slowly until your investigation forced their hand. The blog post attempting to discredit you? That spooked some of our targets. They started making mistakes. A knock interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered, with urgent news. Your Honor, federal agents just raided the precinct. They're seizing all the computer equipment and files. Carter nodded. Make sure today's hearing is moved to the federal courthouse, and contact Mr. Williams, his civil me. Case just got much bigger. At the FBI field office, Savannah sat in an interrogation room, still trying to process the morning's events. The door opened, and the lead agent, she'd introduced herself as Special Agent Monica Torres, entered with a thick file. Let's talk about River Creek, Torres said, taking a seat. Specifically about what happened there before you transferred. Savannah's throat went dry. I don't know what you mean. Torres opened the file, removing a photograph. It showed a younger Savannah with several River Creek officers, including a man Torres identified as Lieutenant James Cooper. Cooper's been running this network for years, Torres explained, identifying officers with the right mindset, training them in evidence manipulation, report fabrication, selective enforcement, then placing them in departments across the region. I never, Savannah started. Never what? Never knew about the network, or never thought you'd get caught. Torres laid out more photographs. We have everything, Officer Mitchell. The training sessions disguised as poker nights, the software used to corrupt video evidence, the database of preferred candidates for recruitment. Savannah stared at the evidence of a conspiracy she'd been part of without fully understanding its scope. I thought it was just about protecting officers who were doing their job. Is that what you told yourself? Torres's voice was surprisingly gentle. That arresting people without cause, falsifying evidence, violating civil rights? That was just doing your job? In another interrogation room, Phillips was breaking down. They approached me right after I was hired, he confessed. Said if I wanted to keep my job, I needed to be a team player. It started small, just occasional video files that needed to disappear. Then they wanted me to install their software. Captain Drake, despite his earlier immunity deal, found himself facing new federal charges. His attorney sat grim-faced as U.S. Attorney Chen outlined the evidence linking him to the larger conspiracy. Your immunity covered departmental misconduct, Chen explained. It doesn't extend to federal crimes. We have emails, financial records, travel documents, all showing your role in expanding this network. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as local media caught wind of the raids. Judge Carter's expanded investigation had transformed into something much larger. In the main courtroom, now packed with federal prosecutors, defense attorneys, and journalists, the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. U.S. Attorney Chen addressed the court. What began as an investigation into one officer's misconduct has exposed a systematic effort to subvert justice across multiple jurisdictions. This network identified and recruited officers who showed a willingness to abuse their authority. They provided tools and training for evidence manipulation, created cover stories for civil rights violations, and actively worked to discredit anyone who threatened to expose their activities. Darnell Washington and his family sat in the gallery, watching as their personal injury case transformed into a landmark civil rights prosecution. Marcus Williams had already filed motions to expand their lawsuit into a class action, representing dozens of victims across multiple jurisdictions. During a brief recess, Williams met with the Washingtons in a conference room. This changes everything, he explained. The federal investigation has uncovered evidence of a coordinated effort to violate civil rights. Your case helped expose it, but now we're looking at systematic abuse going back years. Patricia Washington gripped her son's hand. All those other families? We'll finally have a chance at justice, Williams assured her. The FBI has been building this case for months. Judge Carter's investigation just helped them move faster. Back in the interrogation room, Savannah faced a decision. Agent Torres, had laid out her options: cooperate fully and immediately, or face maximum federal charges. "Why me?" Savannah asked. "I was just a rookie." "You were their ideal recruit," Torres replied. "Young, ambitious, already primed to view authority as absolute. They spotted you in River Creek, guided your transfer here, made sure you were trained by their people. You weren't just a rookie, you were an investment." The words hit Savannah like physical blows. Every choice she'd thought was hers had been carefully orchestrated. Her transfer, her training assignments, even her early solo patrol that led to Darnell's arrest, all planned to cement her place in their system. "I cooperate," she said slowly. "I need to know something first." "What?" "How many?" Savannah's voice cracked. "How many people did they hurt using officers like me?" Torres opened another file. "We've identified over 300 cases so far, across 15 departments. And those are just the ones we can prove." Savannah thought about Darnell Washington, multiplied his experience by 300. The weight of it seemed to crush the air from her lungs. "I'll tell you everything," she whispered. By late afternoon, Judge Carter's courtroom had been transformed into a command center for the federal investigation. U.S. Attorney Chen presented the preliminary findings. "The network operated like a pyramid scheme for civil rights violations," she explained. "Senior officers identified recruits who showed promising signs: excessive force complaints, racial profiling patterns, resistance to oversight. These recruits were mentored, trained in evidence manipulation, and eventually placed in positions to recruit others." Judge Carter listened intently as Chen detailed how the conspiracy spread. "They created a shadow training program. Official records showed proper procedure, while select officers were taught how to falsify reports, manipulate body camera footage, and handle civilian complaints. They even had a scoring system. Officers earned points for successful arrests that wouldn't hold up under proper scrutiny." The afternoon brought a parade of cooperating witnesses. Phillips provided technical details about the software used to corrupt video evidence. Training officers described how they identified potential recruits. Even Captain Drake, facing federal charges despite his earlier deal, began sharing information about the network's hierarchy. But it was Savannah's testimony that captured everyone's attention. She described her recruitment in River Creek, the subtle way they tested her boundaries, the gradual normalization of misconduct. "They never called it corruption," she explained, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "It was always about maintaining authority or supporting fellow officers. They made it seem noble, like we were protecting the thin blue line between order and chaos." As she spoke, Judge Carter noticed Darnell Washington and his family in the gallery. Their personal tragedy had sparked an investigation that would impact hundreds of lives. The judge made a note to acknowledge their role when he issued his final ruling. The day's most dramatic moment came when Agent Torres presented evidence linking the conspiracy to several high-profile cases of police misconduct in other cities. "This wasn't just about individual officers," Torres testified. "This was a coordinated effort to prevent accountability, to maintain systems of oppression under the guise of law enforcement." Savannah listened from the witness stand, each revelation adding to her understanding of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. The idealistic rookie who thought she was maintaining order had been a pawn in a much darker game. During the final hour, U.S. Attorney Chen outlined the next steps. "We've secured search warrants for 23 additional locations. Federal agents are working with state prosecutors to review every case handled by identified network members. And we're establishing a task force to handle the expected flood of civil rights cases." Judge Carter addressed the courtroom before adjourning. "What began in this court as an examination of one arrest has exposed a cancer in our justice system. The coming days will be difficult for everyone involved, but sunlight remains the best disinfectant. This court will continue working with federal authorities to ensure that every victim of this conspiracy receives justice." As federal marshals led the arrested officers away, Savannah caught a glimpse of Sergeant Thompson in the gallery. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw not condemnation, but a deep sadness. He'd tried to warn her, to guide her toward a different path, but the conspiracy's influence had been too strong. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps as U.S. Attorney Chen held a press conference. Cameras flashed as she announced the formation of a special joint task force to investigate police corruption. In his chambers, Judge Carter met privately with the Washington family and their attorney. "Your strength in pursuing justice didn't just help your own case," he told them. "You've given hope to hundreds of other families who suffered similar injustices." Darnell, who had remained quiet throughout much of the day's proceedings, finally spoke. "What happens next?" "Justice," Carter replied simply. "Slow but certain. Every case will be reviewed, every victim will be heard, and those responsible will face consequences for their actions." As evening fell, Savannah was returned to federal custody. In her holding cell, she thought about the road ahead. Cooperation would mean testifying against former colleagues, exposing more corruption, facing the consequences of her actions. But for the first time since her arrest, she felt something close to peace. Agent Torres visited her one last time before transfer. "Why did you agree to cooperate?" Torres asked. "You could have tried to bargain for a better deal," Savannah thought, about Michelle Washington's words in the courthouse bathroom, about Judge Carter's story of redemption, about the 300 lives impacted by the conspiracy. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "the only way to make things right is to tell the whole truth, no matter what it costs you." As her cell door closed, Savannah Mitchell, former officer, conspiracy member, and now key witness, began the long process of making amends. The system that had shaped her into a tool of oppression was crumbling, and in its ruins lay the possibility of real justice. The next morning's headlines would tell part of the story. Federal investigation uncovers multi-state police corruption network. But the real story, of justice delayed but not denied, of truth emerging from darkness, of redemption through accountability, was still being written, one testimony at a time. The federal courthouse's high-security courtroom buzzed with tension as Savannah Mitchell took the witness stand. 6 weeks had passed since the FBI raids, and she'd spent every day preparing for this moment, the start of federal prosecution against the police corruption network. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen approached the podium. "Ms. Mitchell, please tell the court about your first meeting with Lieutenant Cooper at River Creek." Savannah's voice was steady, her police uniform replaced by a simple gray suit. "It was after my third shift. He invited me to what he called a mentorship meeting at his house. There were other officers there, all carefully selected. What happened at these meetings? They started subtle, discussions about maintaining authority, protecting fellow officers. Then they introduced what they called practical techniques for handling difficult situations." "Could you be more specific?" Savannah took a deep breath. "They taught us how to write reports that would justify any action we took, how to describe a civilian's behavior to make them appear threatening, which words to use, which details to emphasize." In the gallery, Sergeant Thompson watched his former rookie outline the conspiracy's methodology. Each revelation highlighted how thoroughly they'd corrupted the basic principles of law enforcement. "These weren't just informal suggestions," Savannah continued. "They had actual training materials, templates for reports, lists of approved phrases, even sample scenarios we would practice." Chen displayed a document on the courtroom screens. "Is this one of those templates?" "Yes. See how it's structured? The civilian is always described as aggressive or non-compliant first. Then our actions are presented as responses to their behavior, never the other way around." Throughout the morning, Savannah detailed the network's operations. She described how Cooper and others identified potential recruits, how they tested loyalty through increasingly questionable assignments, how they created a parallel training system that twisted proper procedures into tools of oppression. During a brief recess, Judge Carter met with federal prosecutors in his chambers. Agent Torres spread out new evidence on his desk. "We've linked the network to similar operations in 12 states," she reported. Same methods, same training materials, same pattern of evidence manipulation. They were building a nationwide system. Carter studied the documents. How many officers involved? Conservative estimate, over 500, and those are just the active participants. There are probably twice as many who knew, but stayed quiet. The afternoon session brought Phillips to the stand. The former IT manager had turned state's evidence, providing technical details about the network's digital operations. The software wasn't just for corrupting video, he explained. It was designed to create plausible technical failures. If someone investigated, they'd find what looked like genuine file corruption or system errors. Who provided this software? Chen asked. It came through Cooper, but it was developed by a private company called Blue Line Security Solutions. Phillips paused. A company owned by retired police officials from multiple departments. The revelation sent ripples through the courtroom. The conspiracy hadn't just corrupted active officers, it had created a profitable business model for continuing that corruption. As Phillips testified about technical details, Savannah sat with federal marshals in a secure room, watching on closed-circuit TV. Each piece of evidence showed her how small her role had been in a much larger machine. During her next session on the stand, Chen directed her attention to specific cases. Tell us about Jeremy Torres, Chen prompted. Savannah's composure cracked slightly. 19 years old. I arrested him for suspicious behavior near a convenience store, the same store where I later arrested Darnell Washington. What happened to Mr. Torres? He spent 3 weeks in jail before the charges were dropped. Lost his job. His girlfriend was pregnant at the time. He missed their first ultrasound appointment because he was in custody. And was there any legitimate reason for his arrest? No. Savannah's voice caught. He was just there. But he fit the profile we were taught to target. Young, minority, in what they called a high-value enforcement zone. In the gallery, Marcus Williams sat with several other civil rights attorneys. They'd been compiling similar cases, building a massive class action lawsuit that would eventually include over 300 plaintiffs. The prosecution's case continued with testimony from Cooper's former secretary, who'd secretly documented years of suspicious meetings and conversations. They called it quality control, she testified. Every week, they'd review body camera footage from officers in multiple departments. Not to check for misconduct, to identify officers who showed potential for recruitment. They looked for specific behaviors, attitudes toward civilians, willingness to escalate situations. The evidence mounted. Financial records showing payments to Blue Line Security Solutions, training schedules disguised as routine departmental meetings, performance evaluations that rewarded aggressive enforcement while ignoring civilian complaints. During cross-examination, defense attorneys tried to paint Savannah as an opportunist, turning on her colleagues to save herself. But her testimony remained consistent, her remorse genuine. Yes, I'm testifying in exchange for consideration in sentencing, she acknowledged. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because people were hurt, hundreds of people, and staying silent would make me complicit in every future abuse this system enables. As the day's session ended, Judge Carter made an unexpected announcement. Tomorrow, this court will hear from those most affected by these actions. The prosecution will present testimony from citizens whose lives were impacted by the network's operations. The next morning, Jeremy Torres was the first to take the stand. Now 21, with a toddler daughter, he described how his wrongful arrest had derailed his life. I lost my job at the warehouse, he testified. 3 weeks in jail, no communication with my employer. By the time I got out, they'd replaced me. My girlfriend's family wanted her to leave me. They thought there must have been a reason for my arrest. Even after the charges were dropped, people looked at me differently. One by one, victims shared their stories. A nurse who lost her license after a falsified drug arrest, a college student whose scholarship was revoked, a small business owner whose reputation was damaged by manufactured charges of disorderly conduct. Savannah forced herself to watch each testimony, to hear every detail of how the system she'd served had destroyed lives. During a break, she encountered Jeremy Torres in a courthouse hallway, accompanied by federal marshals. He studied her for a long moment. "You really didn't see us as people, did you?" "No," she admitted quietly. "We were taught to see threats, statistics, quotas. Never individuals with lives and families and dreams. And now? Now I see too clearly, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." The prosecution's case concluded with testimony from civil rights experts who outlined the broader social impact of targeted enforcement and systemic bias. They presented data showing how the network's operations had disproportionately affected minority communities, creating cycles of distrust and fear. In his closing argument, U.S. Attorney Chen addressed the bigger picture. This case isn't just about corrupt officers or manipulated evidence. It's about the deliberate perversion of justice itself. The defendants didn't just break the law, they systematically undermined the very principles of equal protection and due process. The jury's deliberations lasted 3 days. When they returned, the verdicts were unanimous. Guilty on all counts for Cooper and the other conspiracy leaders. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. For Savannah, the hardest moment came after the verdicts, when she met with Marcus Williams and his clients to formally apologize. "I know words aren't enough," she told them. "But I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'll work to repair the damage I helped cause." Williams nodded. "That work begins now. The civil case needs your testimony about specific incidents, policies, and patterns of behavior. It won't be easy." "I understand." Savannah squared her shoulders. "Whatever you need." The civil proceedings brought a different kind of reckoning. Where the criminal trial had focused on the conspiracy's leaders, the civil case exposed the daily impact of their policies. Savannah testified for weeks, detailing how seemingly routine police actions had been weaponized against innocent civilians. During a break in the civil proceedings, she met with her therapist, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a counselor specializing in law enforcement trauma. "How are you handling the testimony?" Reynolds asked. Savannah stared out the office window. "Every day, I learn about another life I helped destroy, another family traumatized, another community's trust shattered. And how are you processing that?" "I'm not sure I should be allowed to process it," Savannah admitted. "Maybe carrying this weight is part of making amends." "Punishment and redemption aren't the same thing," Reynolds reminded her. "You can acknowledge your guilt while still working toward healing, both for yourself and those you harmed." The civil case concluded with a landmark settlement. The departments involved agreed to massive reforms, including independent oversight, mandatory bias training, and a civilian review board with real authority. The class action plaintiffs received substantial compensation, though everyone acknowledged that money couldn't fully repair the damage done. Judge Carter presided over the final settlement hearing. His closing remarks would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "Today we've seen justice done in terms of legal remedy, but true justice requires more than verdicts and settlements. It requires a fundamental change in how we view authority, accountability, and human dignity. The officers involved in this conspiracy didn't start their careers intending to become corrupt. They were gradually led down that path by a system that prioritized power over service, control over protection. As we implement these reforms, we must remember that the badge is not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of public trust." In the aftermath, Savannah began working with police reform advocates, sharing her experiences to help identify and prevent similar corruption. She spoke at academy training sessions, her story serving as a powerful warning about the seductive nature of unchecked authority. 1 year after the initial investigation, she was invited to speak at a community reconciliation forum. The audience included many of her former victims, including Darnell Washington and his family. "I won't ask for forgiveness," she told them. "What I did, what we all did, caused harm that can never be fully undone. Instead, I ask for the opportunity to help prevent others from suffering the same injustice. Every day, I work with departments and training programs to recognize and stop the patterns that enabled our abuse of power." Michelle Washington, who still couldn't bring herself to wait outside her office, asked the hardest question: "How do we know this won't happen again?" Because now we know what to look for, Savannah replied. The subtle ways authority can be corrupted. The small compromises that lead to bigger ones. The importance of true accountability. But most importantly, because people like your brother had the courage to stand up and demand justice, no matter the cost. Darnell, who had finally resumed his Thursday lunches with Michelle, at a different location, added his perspective. The system didn't fail just because of corrupt officers. It failed because good people stayed silent. Change happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. The forum ended with the announcement of a new civilian oversight committee, led by community members and reform advocates. Sergeant Thompson, who had retired from the force to focus on police reform, served as a technical advisor. As the anniversary of Judge Carter's initial ruling approached, the changes were evident. Body camera footage was automatically uploaded to secure, independent servers. Civilian complaints were investigated by an outside agency. Training programs emphasized de-escalation and community engagement. But the most significant change was invisible. A shift in how authority was viewed and exercised. Officers learned to see their power not as a right, but as a responsibility. Communities began to cautiously rebuild trust with law enforcement. Savannah's sentencing, delayed by her cooperation and testimony, finally arrived. She stood before Judge Carter one last time, having helped dismantle the corrupt system she'd once served. Carter reviewed her contributions to the investigation before speaking. Ms. Mitchell, your actions caused real harm to real people. No amount of cooperation can erase that fact. However, your efforts to expose and reform the system that enabled that harm have been substantial. This court sentences you to 5 years, with 3 years suspended, plus 5 years of supervised release. During that time, you will continue your work with reform advocates and training programs. As she was led away to begin her sentence, Savannah caught a glimpse of Officer James Wilson in the gallery, the man who had once shown Judge Carter a different path. He nodded slightly, acknowledging that even in the darkness of corruption, there was always a chance for light to break through. The story of one rookie officer's journey from blind authority to conscious accountability became part of a larger narrative about justice, reform, and the ongoing work of building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. It wasn't a happy ending. There was too much damage for that. But it was something equally important: a new beginning.